I used to think families were maps, names and lines that told you where you belonged. In the Carter house, I learned maps can lie. Our reunions were the kind people photographed for Christmas cards. Long folding tables dressed in rented linen, casseroles marching in perfect rows, cousins swarming like bees around a cake with too many candles. At the head table, there were place cards, cream with gold ink. Andrew, Vanessa, Mom, Dad. Even Uncle Lou, who only showed up to borrow tools, he never returned. I walked the length of that table once, twice, pretending to admire the centerpiece until I had to admit what my eyes already knew. There was no card for Isabella. "Don't hover, Mom," Diane said, without looking up from arranging cutlery. "Sit anywhere." Anywhere, as if belonging were a folding chair you could drag to the corner. Andrew, 2 years younger, golden by decree, threw an arm around my shoulders long enough to stage a photo. "Smile, Izzy," he whispered, teeth bright. The flash went off. His arm slid away like we'd never touched. Across the yard, Vanessa spun in a new dress, and everyone clapped like she'd cured a disease instead of turning in a slow circle. I took my unassigned seat at the end of the last table, where the tablecloth ran out and the grass began. A stray dog from the neighborhood pressed its nose against the fence, as if sensing there might be scraps. I wanted to name him. I wanted someone to name me. The thing about being the invisible child is that adults reward you for it. "You're so independent, Isabella," Dad, Martin, would say when I cleared plates no one noticed I had eaten from. "So helpful." Helpful became my talent. Quiet became my costume. When Andrew forgot homework, vanishing deadlines reappeared like magic. When Vanessa missed curfew, Mom sighed about creative spirits and free hearts. When I won the regional science fair, Dad snapped a photo on his phone and said, "Send it to your grandmother. She'll make a fuss." Grandmother Margaret always did. She'd tuck my clipping into a frame and set it on the piano like a small prize the house had actually earned. She was the only person who looked at me as if I were already someone, not a placeholder for someone easier to love. In her kitchen, smelling of citrus and old books, she taught me quiet skills that felt sharper than applause. How to fix a loose button, how to write a thank you note that named a kindness, how to keep a record when memories try to run. "Write what happened," she'd say, sliding a notebook toward me. "Not how they made you feel. Feelings change, facts don't. Daylight loves facts." Daylight. I didn't understand then how much I would need that word. By high school, my calendar was a ledger of being almost seen. I maintained straight A's, led the STEM club, and earned a summer scholarship in a lab that smelled like bleach and possibility. The week I presented my first poster, my name printed in fonts I'd chosen carefully, Vanessa posted a video of herself learning a TikTok dance. At dinner, everyone passed her phone around, laughing and clapping. My poster tube leaned against the wall like an umbrella no one wanted to carry. Grandmother Margaret cut me a slice of pie that night and slid it across the table without a speech. "Tell me," she said. I told her about proteins folding and errors unfurling and the heat of the projector bulb on my face. She smiled as if I'd sung her favorite song. When she hugged me goodbye, something cool pressed into my palm. A small ruby ring, simple, oval, a red so clear it looked like it had swallowed light. "It was mine when I had nothing," she said. "Now it's yours for the same reason." I wore that ring for the first time on my 18th birthday, the one my family forgot until Vanessa needed an audience for blowing out candles on a keg Mom said we might as well share. I made a wish I didn't believe in and watched smoke curl into the ceiling like a secret that wouldn't hold. If you had asked me then what I wanted most, I would have said, a name on a card. Not money, not even praise. Just proof that someone in that house expected me on purpose. Instead, I learned to expect myself. I saved paychecks from tutoring, chose a state university because the scholarship was full, and moved out with 2 suitcases and a plant that immediately died. At the curb, Mom dabbed at invisible tears and told me to text, which she would not answer. Dad looked at the boxes like a problem set he didn't have time to solve. Andrew tossed me a half hug. Vanessa filmed a quick clip. Big sis flies the nest, and told me to like and share. Grandmother Margaret stood apart, fragile as glass and hard as the truth. She tucked a white envelope into my backpack, for when the world acts like math and the sums don't add up. And made me promise to write. I promised. She made me promise again. Record what's real, she said. You'll need it. College gave me a different kind of oxygen. In lecture halls where professors knew my name because I wrote it boldly. In labs where results were measurable. In friendship that wasn't a performance. I discovered the relief of rooms where effort counted and the terror of bills that didn't care. I sent home news in neat paragraphs and received back emojis and once a proud of you that arrived at 2 a.m. and felt like it had been drunk dialed by obligation. The last reunion I attended was the summer before everything broke for good. The tables were the same, the linen newer. A musician played covers of songs I didn't recognize because I had been busy learning to build a life. Place cards glittered. I walked the length without pretending this time. No, Isabella. I stood at the head of the table and waited until Mom looked up. You forgot me. She blinked, as if the light had changed. Without warning. Sit anywhere, honey, anywhere. I set my jaw, took a pen from my bag, and wrote my name on a napkin in letters large enough to be read from across the yard. I set it on a plate and sat down. The napkin wilted by dessert. My name bled into the linen. That night, in my childhood room, I opened the envelope grandmother had given me on the curb months earlier. Inside was a check I didn't cash and a note in her careful hand. This is for starting lines, not finish lines. When they forget your chair, build your own table. When they try to dim you, move closer to daylight. M. I ran my thumb over the ruby and said out loud, to no one and to myself, okay. I didn't know it yet, but the map I'd been given, Carter by name, invisible by design, was about to be redrawn. The woman who taught me daylight would leave me a compass. The house that never saved me a seat would teach me, by its absence, how to reserve my life for those who showed up. For now, I slept under a ceiling that had watched me practice being small, and I dreamed in blueprints, doors that opened from my side, a gate with my hand on the switch, a place where my name didn't need ink to exist. The call came on a wet March morning. I was 23, fresh out of college, living in a one-room apartment where rain drummed on the skylight like impatient fingers. Mom's voice crackled through the phone. Your grandmother's gone. The service is Friday. The world stilled. Margaret, my compass, my witness, my only proof I hadn't been imagined, was gone. At the funeral, the pews were full of relatives who suddenly remembered her name. They wept into tissues, murmured about her pies, clutched at each other like grief made them holy. I sat between Andrew and Vanessa, neither of whom offered me a hand. My fingers twisted the ruby ring until the skin beneath burned. When the service ended, we filed into the lawyer's office, damp coats dripping, hearts pretending to be heavy. The will was read aloud, paragraphs of legal fabric stitched over decades of life. Then came the line that changed everything. To my granddaughter, Isabella Carter, I leave the majority of my estate. She alone carries the discipline and daylight I trust. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. Andrew's mouth fell open. Vanessa let out a small, incredulous laugh. My parents froze, then turned toward me with faces I'll never forget. Equal parts betrayal and disgust. You, Vanessa whispered, sharp as glass. Why you? I couldn't answer. I didn't understand it either, not fully. Margaret's house, her savings, her modest portfolio, all named to me. Not to her children, not to the golden heirs, to the invisible granddaughter who never had a chair. The lawyer's voice droned on about details, but I couldn't hear over the pounding in my ears. My father's voice cut through, flat and cold. She wasn't even ours. The room blurred. What do you mean? I asked. Mom's lips tightened. You were adopted, Isabella. Margaret insisted we take you in when you were an infant. You were a project she forced on us. The words fell like stones. Adopted. Forced. Not ours. Andrew leaned back in his chair, smirking with sudden clarity. Explains a lot, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Vanessa crossed her arms. So Grandma plays favorites with the charity case. Figures. The lawyer cleared his throat, uncomfortable. The will is legally binding. Mrs. Carter's wishes are clear. But nothing was clear to me. The air was heavy with betrayal. And beneath it, a wound opened wide. I wasn't just invisible, I was disposable. When we left the office, Mom pulled me aside, nails digging into my arm. Don't think this makes you family. Margaret may have left you her things, but she didn't change blood. Remember that. Her eyes were fierce, her voice low enough no one else heard. Then she turned and looped her arm through Vanessa's, leaving me standing alone in the rain. That night, in Margaret's empty house, I walked the halls she'd filled with warmth. Every framed photograph of me smiled back like proof I hadn't imagined her love. On the piano sat my science fair clipping, still polished in glass. Beside it, the notebook she'd given me, half filled with her notes and mine. On the first blank page, I wrote through tears. They said I wasn't theirs. Maybe not. But I was hers, and that's enough. I closed the book and slipped the ruby ring back on. The wound was raw, the will a weapon in the wrong hands, but it was also a gift. A map Margaret had drawn in daylight, one I was finally ready to follow. It was the night I swore that being excluded would no longer break me. It would build me. The day I left the Carter house for the last time, the air smelled of lemon polish and resentment. Boxes stood by the front door, Margaret's keepsakes, the few things of hers I had claimed. Her notebook, her fountain pen, the ruby ring, a set of books annotated in her looping script. Martin and Diane stood in the hallway, arms crossed, faces carved in stone. Andrew leaned against the banister, smirking like a cat that had just claimed the cream. Vanessa scrolled on her phone, pretending I wasn't even there. Don't expect us to call, my mother said. Her voice was thin, but the cruelty was deliberate. Margaret may have forced you into this family, but we don't owe you anything. I set down the last box and looked her in the eye. Number you never did, my father grunted. Don't waste her inheritance. It should have gone to blood. Funny, I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. Because blood is the only thing you ever gave me, and it wasn't worth much. I walked out the door, Margaret's ring cutting cool against my skin, and didn't look back. San Francisco welcomed me not with open arms, but with bills and noise. My grandmother's savings weren't vast, but they covered tuition for my master's degree, and the rent for a one-room studio that smelled perpetually of someone else's cooking. Days, I worked, waiting tables, tutoring high school students, stacking shelves in a bookstore. Nights, I coded until my eyes blurred, surviving on caffeine and determination. The city was a grindstone, and I was willing to be sharpened. But solitude pressed in. I walked by families in Golden Gate Park, picnicking with laughter that looked effortless, and felt the whole of not belonging. I sent messages to Andrew and Vanessa, short lines like, hope you're well or thinking of you. None were answered. My parents blocked my number after I tried once too often. Some nights, I sat by the window with Margaret's notebook open, recording facts like she taught me. Tuesday. No one called. Wednesday. Another shift at the diner. Thursday. Professor emailed back. My code worked. When feelings clawed at me, I wrote those too, but always after the facts. It was Margaret's way of making sure truth had a spine. The wound from the will still bled, but Margaret's voice lingered. Build your own table. Move closer to daylight. And so I built. My turning point came at a hackathon held in a noisy warehouse near the Embarcadero. I almost didn't go. My shoes were worn, my laptop outdated, and my confidence thin. But Margaret's envelope had held just enough for me to register, and I told myself daylight doesn't wait. Inside, 100 strangers tapped keyboards and scribbled on whiteboards. The air buzzed with ambition and caffeine. I found a quiet corner and began drafting my idea. A cybersecurity framework not just for corporations, but for individuals. Ordinary people who wanted to guard their lives from digital theft. I called it Fortisphere. At first, no one noticed me. Then a woman in a neat blazer stopped at my table. She introduced herself as Professor Grace Lynn, a mentor for the event. She asked questions not like she was doubting me, but like she was drawing the idea out of me piece by piece. For the first time in years, I felt seen without auditioning for it. "You've built a wall," she said when I finished explaining, "but you've also left a door for people to step through safely. That balance is rare. Don't abandon it." That night, our prototype won second place. But for me, it was a first. The first time someone beyond Margaret looked at my work and said, "This matters." When the prize money came, a modest check, I taped it into Margaret's notebook. Beneath it I wrote, "First brick of the table I'm building." It was small, it was fragile, but it was mine. And as I closed the notebook, I whispered into the quiet apartment, "Daylight, Grandma, I'm moving closer." The check from the hackathon bought me 3 more months of rent, and the kind of optimism that only lasts until the first investor meeting. I had prepared slides, practiced in front of the mirror until my voice cracked, even borrowed a blazer 2 sizes too big from a classmate. But when I pitched Fortisphere to a panel of venture capitalists, they smiled the way adults do at a child's drawing, fond, dismissive, already forgetting it as they turned the page. Too ambitious. Crowded market. Why not aim smaller? A simple app, maybe? Their words landed like stones. I walked out of that glass tower with my borrowed blazer clinging damp to my back, humiliation burning hotter than the city sun. Still, I wrote it down in Margaret's notebook. Meeting 1. No support. Facts. 12 slides, 18 minutes, 0 funding. Then beneath it, smaller. Bruises are not broken bones, weeks blurred. I rotated between shifts at the diner, tutoring sessions that ended with students more interested in TikTok than algebra, and long nights coding in my studio. My fingers ached, my eyes blurred, but the framework grew, lines of code becoming a lattice that could hold. Bills stacked faster than progress. Once, I came home to find the power shut off, the apartment dark except for the last light on my laptop screen. I huddled there until dawn, typing with fingers numb, telling myself daylight would come if I built long enough. It was Professor Grace Lynn who saved me from collapse. She found me slumped over in the university cafe, nursing a single cup of coffee I couldn't afford. "You look like someone trying to outrun a storm without shoes," she said gently. "I'm fine," I lied. She sat across from me, folding her hands. "Do you know what my mentor told me once? The idea is important, yes, but so is the hand that carries it. You need allies, Isabella, not an audience. Allies." Her words burrowed deep. Allies, not applause. That summer, at a networking event I almost skipped, Grace introduced me to Jonathan Pierce, a lean man with the kind of calm presence that made noise quiet itself around him. He listened as I stumbled through my pitch, eyes sharp, but not cruel. "Cybersecurity for everyday people," he repeated, rubbing his chin. "Not just Fortune 500 companies, for families, students, the overlooked." I nodded, heart thundering. "The invisible," I whispered, before I could stop myself. His gaze softened. "That's personal." "Yes," I admitted, "because I know what it's like to be erased. I don't want others to feel that helpless." He didn't smile. He didn't dismiss. He simply said, "Show me." For the next hour, I walked him through prototypes, flaws, and the vision beyond them. At the end, he closed his notebook and said, "You're not polished, but you're persistent. I can work with persistent." 2 weeks later, Jonathan cut the first check that kept Fortisphere alive. Not much, but enough. Enough to turn lights back on, to buy proper equipment, to rent a co-working space instead of coding in the dark. That night, I taped the check stub into Margaret's notebook. Beneath it, I wrote, "First brick, second brick. The table is taking shape." For the first time, I believed it might stand. The first year of Fortisphere was less about glory and more about survival. Jonathan's seed check bought servers, a legal license, and exactly one part-time assistant. The rest was me, coding until dawn, chasing bugs like shadows in an alley, and pitching to anyone with ears. For every person who listened, 5 turned away. "Too niche," they said. "Consumers don't pay for protection." Competitors cropped up with shinier branding, their apps pretty shells that promised security but offered little. Once I discovered my own lines of code, mirrored, stolen from a demo I had foolishly shared too freely. It burned. But Margaret's voice steadied me from the page of her notebook. Daylight loves facts. Record them, don't bury them. So I recorded every theft, every rejection. Not as wounds, but as evidence. The turning point came one winter afternoon, when a university in Oakland called. Their network had been breached, student data siphoned away. "We heard about your framework," the IT director said, desperation breaking through his formal tone. "Can you help?" I worked 72 hours straight, fueled by cold pizza and adrenaline. When the attack was contained, the director shook my hand like I had handed him back a heartbeat. "You're not just selling software," he said. "You're restoring trust." Word spread. A local paper ran the headline, "Invisible Shield Built by Unknown Founders Saves Student Data." For the first time, my name, Isabella Carter, appeared in print not as a footnote, but as the headline. I clipped the article, taped it into the record of daylight, and wrote beneath it, "They erased me from family photos." The city just printed my name in black and white. Recognition came with new storms. Competitors tried to discredit me online, whispering that I was unqualified, that my adoption made me unstable, that a woman couldn't lead a security company. Anonymous posts dug into my past, framing my family's rejection as proof of untrustworthiness. For a night, I sat frozen in my apartment, laptop screen glowing with slander. Old voices crept in, Mom calling me not really ours, Andrew smirking about the charity case. I wanted to crawl back into silence, but then Ethan's face. No, not yet, not him. Not in this chapter. Back then it was Grace's words, sharp as flint. "You need allies, not an audience." I called Jonathan. "They're trying to kill us before we grow," I said. He chuckled. "Then grow louder." We did. Jonathan arranged interviews. Grace connected me with panels. I stepped onto stages trembling but unbroken, telling the truth about why Fortisphere mattered. Because security isn't just for the powerful. It's for the forgotten, the overlooked, the invisible. Each time I spoke those words, it felt less like marketing and more like testimony. By the end of that year, Fortisphere had contracts with 3 universities, 2 hospitals, and a non-profit network of shelters. Revenue trickled, then streamed. Recognition followed. Tech blogs ran headlines. Venture capitalists who once dismissed me now requested meetings. I never forgot their earlier smirks. I kept notes. Facts, not feelings. Names, not grudges. Because Margaret had taught me, truth doesn't rot when you keep it in daylight. That winter, I stood in my tiny office, looking at the glowing servers humming in a corner. The air smelled of ozone and possibility. For the first time, I didn't feel like an imposter renting space in a world that didn't want me. I felt like a founder. Success didn't arrive like a trumpet blast. It crept in like tidewater, slow and steady, until I looked around and realized I was standing on new ground. Fortisphere signed its first corporate contract 2 years after the Oakland rescue. Then came another and another. Universities called us guardians of knowledge. Nonprofits called us the quiet shield. Each deal built momentum. Each press clipping lifted our name higher. By year 5, venture capital poured in from the same people who had once told me my dream was too ambitious. They came with their polished smiles and crafted compliments. I listened, but I never forgot the napkin at the reunion where my name wasn't written. I kept my boundaries in black ink. The office grew from a cramped co-working desk to an entire floor in a downtown high-rise. I hired engineers, designers, analysts. They called me boss, but I told them to call me Isabella. Titles didn't matter. Presence did. We built not just software, but a culture. Transparent, documented, daylight only. Every mistake logged. Every victory recorded. Jonathan smiled one day across the boardroom table and said, "You're not invisible anymore." But part of me thought, I never was. They just refused to look. The mansion came later. I hadn't wanted one at first. I thought wealth meant excess, and excess looked too much like my family's arrogance. But when I visited the estate on the cliffs above Half Moon Bay, something shifted. The house was stone and glass, standing alone against the ocean's roar. Waves crashed below like an anthem, wild and unapologetic. From the balcony, the horizon stretched wide, unbroken. It wasn't vanity, it was a statement, a fortress of presence, carved from years of exclusion. "This is yours," Jonathan said quietly when I hesitated. So I bought it. The first night I walked barefoot across marble floors, Margaret's ruby ring glinting in the moonlight through high windows. The rooms echoed, too large for one person, but I felt her there. "Build your own table," she had written. I had built not just a table, but a hall large enough to host an army of people who had once been erased. I filled the house not with chandeliers and champagne, but with people who showed up, colleagues who believed in the mission, friends like Hannah, who had never let silence become absence, Professor Grace, who attended every launch as if she were family. Together we sat at my long dining table, hand-carved oak, no assigned seats, and raised glasses to survival, to daylight, to each other. I looked around that table and thought, this is family. The news called me a billionaire by year 8. Tech magazines published glossy profiles with headlines like, "From Invisible Daughter to Silicon Valley Titan." Reporters wanted drama. They wanted the adoption story, the betrayal, the estrangement. I gave them pieces, but never the whole wound. Some scars belonged only to me. Still, each article found its way into the record of daylight, not for vanity, for history. Margaret's notebook had become a thick ledger, pages crammed with facts, taped clippings, even rejection letters. I read them sometimes the way people reread fairy tales, except mine was a story carved from absence into presence. And then, one gray autumn afternoon, as waves hammered the cliffs below and the mansion's gates stood tall against the wind, my past arrived. A convoy of cars rolled up the drive, glossy and loud, carrying faces I hadn't seen in 15 years. My parents, Andrew, Vanessa, their children trailing behind, dressed in clothes too fine for comfort. They came not timid, but smiling, as if absence could be erased by charm. I watched from the balcony as the gates opened. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. They had excluded me for half a lifetime. Now they were here, at my gates, expecting entry. The mansion stood behind me, my company hummed beneath me, my chosen family gathered around me. And I knew this was the moment Margaret's compass had been pointing to all along. The gates closed behind them with a groan, iron grinding like the voice of history. I stood at the top of the stone steps, the ocean wind tugging at my hair, while the people who had erased me from their lives now approached as if this were their homecoming. Isabella, Diane's voice carried upward, sugar-coated and brittle. She stretched her arms as though we had shared warm embraces all these years, not silence. Behind her, Martin offered a curt nod, the kind he gave at boardroom tables. Andrew strolled with his usual swagger, a designer watch flashing on his wrist. Vanessa, draped in silk, clutched her handbag like it held the world. Their children trailed behind, eyes darting between the house and me, confusion etched into their young faces. I didn't move. You found the address, I said, my tone flat. Martin cleared his throat. We thought it was time. 15 years is long enough for bitterness, don't you think? Bitterness. That was the word he chose for being erased. You left me, I replied. 15 years of birthdays, graduations, awards, contracts, an entire company. You left. Me, Andrew smiled, practiced and sharp. But look at you now, successful, powerful. Clearly you didn't need us. Isn't it time we act like family again? Vanessa stepped forward, her perfume curling through the air. We want to be part of your life, Bella. Your children will need their aunt and uncle someday. I let the words hang. Children, I repeated. You never cared enough to ask if I wanted them. Her cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. We just want connection. And maybe, her eyes swept the mansion, the cars in the driveway, the land. We can help share the load. Dad's got years of business experience. Andrew knows finance. I could help with PR. Imagine Fortisphere as a family enterprise. There it was. The mask slipped. Not reconciliation. Inheritance. You want a seat at the table, I said. Martin straightened, his voice firm. We deserve it. We are your blood. The word hit like an echo from Margaret's funeral, not ours. Blood when convenient, absence when not. I motioned toward the oak table visible through the glass doors. My chosen family had sat there, eaten there, celebrated every victory there. Not one of the people standing before me had earned even a chair. You left me without a card, I said, without a seat. And now you want to sit at the head of the table I built? Number. Their faces shifted. Diane's eyes glistened with rehearsed tears. Andrew's smile cracked. Vanessa's voice sharpened. You wouldn't even have this without Grandma. You owe us. I owe Margaret, I said, my voice steady. And she's the only one I've honored. Silence fell heavy, broken only by waves battering the cliffs below. Finally, Diane whispered. You wouldn't shut the door on your own parents. I met her gaze. You shut it first. I just learned how to lock mine. The mansion's doors opened behind me. Olivia appeared, my COO and friend, her presence solid. Do you want me to escort them out? She asked softly. Not yet, I replied. They came for a reckoning. They'll get it. I turned back to the family I no longer claimed. And for the first time in my life, I felt taller than all of them. They had returned, yes. But they had returned to my ground, my gates, my table. And this time, the story would not be theirs to write. I let them into the mansion, not out of warmth, but to strip away their excuses. If I turned them away at the gate, they would claim cruelty. Inside my home, under the weight of my success, their intentions would show themselves without disguise. The dining hall was cavernous, its oak table polished and unassigned. My chosen family had filled it with laughter, late-night brainstorms, pizza boxes, and victories. Tonight, it carried only crystal water glasses and the echo of strained silence. They sat where they pleased, though I noticed Martin automatically chose the head, as if entitlement was muscle memory. I remained standing at the far end, the ruby ring catching the chandelier's glow. Diane started first, her voice sweet but brittle. We've missed you, Isabella. We see now how strong you've become, and we only want to be part of your life again. Part of my life, I repeated. What does that mean to you? Andrew leaned back in his chair, his watch glinting. You have a massive company, a global brand. Families are stronger together. I could take on a CFO role, handle the numbers while you focus on innovation. You don't want strangers running the money. Vanessa chimed in smoothly, her smile rehearsed. And I can manage public relations. People love a story of reconciliation. Imagine the press. Estranged family reunited through love and business. It would soften your image, Bella. Martin folded his hands like a statesman. And I could serve on the board. My experience in negotiations, well, it would stabilize things. Keep investors confident. It's only natural that we play our part." Their words dripped with entitlement, not love. A company I built from midnight coding, unpaid rent, and Margaret's belief was now theirs to claim because of blood. I walked the length of the table slowly, each step echoing on the marble. "Interesting," I said. "Not one of you asked about my life, my marriage, my health, my friends. You came straight to roles, positions, shares." Vanessa's smile faltered. "It's practical, Isabella. We're thinking about the future." "The future of who?" I asked. Diane's eyes glistened with manufactured tears. "Don't be so hard on us. We're family. You wouldn't lock us out after all this time." I stopped at the chair opposite Martin, my gaze level. "You locked me out first. 15 years. Not a call, not a card. You left me to sit at empty tables and pretend it didn't matter. You wanted absence, until presence became profitable." The silence that followed was raw. Only the ocean wind against glass filling the void. Then Martin snapped, voice sharp. "You wouldn't even have this without Margaret's money. You owe us." The fury that rose in me was not wildfire. It was stone, cold, heavy, unshakable. I owe Margaret everything. That's why I honored her lessons. That's why I built this. That's why her name, not yours, is engraved on the foundation of my company. Their faces hardened. The performance had cracked. What remained was hunger. I leaned forward, hands flat on the table. "You came for a reckoning. You'll have one. Tomorrow morning, you'll receive documents spelling out exactly what I will and will not give. You'll sign them or you'll leave with nothing. And I'll ensure the truth of our history is written down for anyone who asks." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "And if we refuse?" I slid Margaret's notebook across the table. Its spine was thick with years of entries, receipts, clippings, evidence. Then daylight answers for me. For the first time that evening, none of them spoke. Their silence was louder than any plea. I closed the book with finality and said, "This table belongs to those who show up. You showed up 15 years too late." Morning light poured through the tall windows, gilding the stone floors as if the house itself demanded clarity. I had slept little, not from fear, but from focus. The printer in my study hummed through the night, spitting out contracts that distilled 15 years of silence into ink and clauses. When Martin, Diane, Andrew, and Vanessa filed into the study, their faces were stiff, rehearsed. They expected negotiations, a bargaining table. What they found instead was daylight written down. I handed each of them a folder. "These are the terms," I said. Andrew flipped pages, his jaw tightening. "No equity? No board position?" "No," I said flatly. "Fortisphere was built without you, and it will continue without you." Vanessa scanned hers with rising fury. "This is insulting. You give us nothing. Just a gag order?" "Not a gag order," I corrected. "A truth clause. You will publicly acknowledge that for 15 years, you excluded me, that you ignored me, that you abandoned me, and you will never again use my name for leverage in the press. If you violate it, I take legal action for defamation." Diane's voice trembled. "You can't cut out your own blood like this." I looked at her evenly. "Blood cut me out first." Martin slammed his folder shut. "This is punishment." "This is consequence," I replied. "You taught me punishment when you left me no chair at the table. Margaret taught me consequence, the math of truth." They bristled, but I continued before the air could fracture further. "There is one exception. The Carter Children's Trust. Every niece and nephew has a fund established in their name. It bypasses you entirely. Tuition, housing, mentorship. They will not inherit your neglect. They will inherit opportunity." The room shifted. Andrew's face paled. Vanessa's eyes flickered with something she tried to mask as disdain, but for a breath, I saw fear. Fear that her children would know daylight without her permission. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Because I was a child once," I said. "And no child deserves to grow up measuring their worth against absence." I slid Margaret's notebook across the desk once more. "Every fact is here. every absence, every slight, every receipt. If you want the world to know the story, let them read the record. If you want peace, sign the documents. They hesitated, anger and pride warring with greed. One by one, they signed. Andrew's scrawl was jagged, Vanessa's heavy with pressure, Martin's tight, Diane's shaky. None of them looked at me as they handed the pages back. I gathered the contracts, clipped them neatly, and said, "You came to my house, asking for a seat at the table. You leave today with nothing but daylight and your own names on paper. That is more than I ever got from you." For the first time, none of them had a retort. When they left, the mansion felt lighter. The ocean outside roared approval, waves crashing like applause. That night, I added the signed contracts to the record of daylight. Beneath them, I wrote, "They called it punishment. It is memory. They called it family. It was transaction." Today, I closed the ledger. The day after they left, the mansion was silent but not empty. I walked through the hallways barefoot, hearing only the ocean's steady roar through the open windows. The air felt lighter, as though the house itself had expelled a weight it had carried since the gates first opened. On the dining table lay the signed contracts, clipped neatly together. Their signatures stared back at me like confessions. I slid the folder into the record of daylight, the spine now swollen with years of facts, clippings, and truths that had carried me here. For the first time, I felt ready to close it. But closing did not mean ending. A week later, surrounded by colleagues and friends, I announced the launch of the Margaret Hale Foundation, a scholarship and mentorship program for children who had grown up overlooked, invisible, excluded. "Family is who shows up," I told the reporters. "Margaret showed up for me. Now I will show up for others." The press spun headlines, from Forgotten Daughter to Guardian of Thousands. The world wanted a neat narrative of revenge. What I gave them instead was legacy. That evening, Olivia, Hannah, and Professor Grace joined me at the mansion for dinner. We ate around the oak table, no assigned seats, no rehearsed smiles, just presence. Olivia raised her glass. "To chosen families," she said. "To daylight," Hannah added. "To Margaret," Grace whispered, her eyes kind. I looked at them, my family, unbound by blood but sealed by presence, and felt the ache of old wounds settle into scars, the kind you carry not to remember pain, but to measure how far you've walked. Later, alone in my study, I opened the record of daylight one last time. On the final page, I wrote slowly, carefully, as though the ink itself mattered. They excluded me for 15 years. When they returned, I gave them consequence, not revenge. I built the table they denied me. I filled the chairs with those who stayed. And I carried daylight into every room they once left dark. I set down my pen, closed the book, and placed it on the highest shelf. Not hidden, not buried. Finished. From the balcony, I watched the horizon fade into night, the ocean glowing silver under the moon. Behind me, laughter echoed from the dining hall, my family, my legacy, my truth. And as the waves thundered against the cliffs, I whispered the words Margaret had once pressed into my hands with a ruby ring. Daylight loves facts. This was mine. The record was closed.